This is the lecture for European history for Wednesday, the 12th of January, 2022. Today, we're going to begin class with a series of excerpts from the 1925 German Impressionist silent movie classic, Metropolis. Metropolis was made in 1925, and it posits what life would be like 100 years in the future, in 2025. And it is going to tell a fable about class problems, and it's going to posit a solution. I think I'm going to let the film speak for itself, and we'll talk about it afterwards. But I also think I'm going to turn the heat up a little bit. You're going to see some incredible acting and special effects for a form of movie that doesn't really exist anymore. Silent films required an entirely different dramatic language than talkies, which is what we have since. This film is set in a New York City style Art Deco city of skyscrapers, where the wealthy live in penthouses, the machines are at ground level or just below, and the workers live below the machines, literally reflecting a sense of social class. And yeah, I guess I'll let the film speak for itself, and then we will talk. Bear in mind that Moloch is another name for the devil. Moloch particularly was the god to which some Jews who had betrayed Yahweh went along with pagans to sacrifice children to. Moloch was a god that demanded blood right sacrifice of children. So, in that extended set of clips from Metropolis, you saw a vision of the future, which is actually a vision of the past. People write science fiction, but they don't genuinely have a window into future times. All science fiction, like all fables and myths, are really about what people are dealing with at the moment. And the problem of industry is a real one. I will tell you in the movie that the mayor's son, Frater, becomes convinced that he's going to be the heart, but that robot masquerades as Maria, the woman who's leading the underground service. And the robot creates a rebellion that the mayor wants as an excuse to crack down on the workers. But the robot actually goes farther than the mayor intends, and the robot is ready to flood out the city of the workers, killing their families, and burn the city above the ground to ash. And at the moment when the city is in a peak crisis, Frater and Maria come together like Romeo and Juliet to end the feud between the Montagues and the Capulets. They come together and propose that between the head that plans and the hands that do must intercede a heart that feels, that can explain one to the other and create a humane relationship between the two. And do you know who took up this idea? The National Socialist German Workers' Party. They became the warm and fuzzy heart that Fritz Lang was talking about. At least they advertised themselves as such. And Mussolini's fascists to an extent also. This is not what Fritz Lang wanted. Fritz Lang actually had to flee Germany to escape the Nazis, and he went to Hollywood. But the idea that there is no sympathy between the owners and the workers, and that this is going to create a situation that can only be resolved by blood, is very, very real. Remember, nobody has ever lived like this before. Let's take a glance in your notes at the 2 pages that are excerpted from George Orwell's The Road to Wigam Pier. Now, this is during the 1930s, when Orwell makes these observations and writes about them. But they apply to industrialization in one way or another. The specifics, though, deal with coal mining towns and industrial towns in the coal area. On going down into a mine, the time to go there is when the machines are roaring and the air is black with coal dust, and when you can actually see what the miners have to do. At those times, the place is like hell, or at any rate, my own mental picture of hell. Most of the things one imagines in hell are there: heat, noise, confusion, darkness, foul air, and above all, unbearably cramped space. Everything except the fire. At the coalface. When you have finally got there, and getting there is a job in itself, I'll explain that in a minute, you crawl through the last line of pit props and see opposite you a shiny black wall 3 or 4 feet high. This is the coalface. Overhead is a smooth ceiling made by the rock from which the coal had been cut. Underneath is the rock again, so that the gallery you're in is only as high as the ledge of coal itself, probably not much more than a yard. Picture this. You have to go from the main roads of the mine out to a particular coal face. So you're going along the route that coal has already been carved out. And you have about a yard of space. So if you could see, if it was light, there'd be a quarter of a mile of rock and earth above you, represented by the ceiling, and then the smooth rock below, and there you are, about a yard of space, crawling with these wooden props holding up the ceiling from the floor to prevent pancakeification. And then you get to the coal face, and then the work needs to be done. The first impression of all, overmastering everything else for a while, is the frightful, deafening din from the conveyor belt which carries the coal away. You cannot see very far because of the fog of coal dust thrown back at the beam of your lamp. But you can see on either side of you the line of half-naked kneeling men, 1 to every 4 or 5 yards, driving their shovels under the fallen coal and flinging it swiftly over their left shoulders. They are feeding the coal onto the conveyor belt, a moving rubber belt a couple of feet wide, which runs a yard or 2 behind them. Down this belt, a glistening river of coal races constantly. In a big mine, it is carried away several tons every minute. It bears it off to some place in the main roads, where it is shot into tubs holding half a ton, and thence dragged to the cages and hoisted into the outer air. This is in a mechanized mine in the 1930s. In the 1830s, that same thing would need to be done, but there would be no automatic conveyor belt. There would be children, carrying baskets of coal back to the bins. And the work would have no mechanical assistance. And instead of having an electric lamp beam on your helmet, you'd have a candle. It is impossible to watch the fillers at work without feeling a pang of envy for their toughness. It's a dreadful job that they do, an almost superhuman job by the standards of an ordinary person. For they are not only shifting monstrous quantities of coal, they are also doing so in a position that doubles or trebles the work. They've got to remain kneeling all the while. And the other conditions do not exactly make things easier. There is the heat, it varies, but in some mines it is suffocating. And the coal dust that stuffs up your throat and nostrils and collects along your eyelids, and the unending rattle of the conveyor belt, which in that confined space is rather like the rattle of a machine gun. I'm not a manual laborer, Orwell writes, and please God, I never shall be one. But there are certain kinds of manual work that I could do if I had to. At a pinch, I could be a tolerable road sweeper, or an inefficient gardener, or even a 10th-rate farmhand. But by no conceivable amount of effort or training could I become a coal miner. The work would kill me in a few weeks. Watching coal miners at work, you realize momentarily what different universes people inhabit. Down there, where the coal is dug, is a sort of world apart, which one can quite easily go through life without ever hearing about. Yet it is the absolutely necessary counterpart to our world above, in order that Hitler may march the goose step, that the Pope may denounce Bolshevism, that the cricket crowds may assemble at Lord's, that the Nancy poets may scratch one another's backs. Coal has got to be forthcoming. Their lamp-lit world down there is as necessary to the daylit world above as the root is to the flower. It is so with all types of manual work. It keeps us alive, and we are oblivious of its existence. In a way, it's even humiliating to watch coal miners working. It raises in you a momentary doubt about your own status as an intellectual and a superior person generally, for it is brought home to you, at least while you are watching, that it is only because miners sweat their guts out that superior persons can remain superior. All of us really owe the comparative decency of our lives to poor drudges underground, blackened to the eyes with their throats full of coal dust, driving their shovels forward with arms and belly muscles of steel. He then goes on to talk about the iniquitous swindle of making the miner pay for the hire of his lamp. At 6 pence a week, he buys the lamp several times over in a single year, but he has to rent it. As you walk through the industrial towns in the north, you lose yourself in labyrinths of little brick houses blackened by smoke, festering in planless chaos round miry alleys and little cindered yards where there are stinking dustbins and lines of grimy washing and half-ruinous water closets. Nobody had internal plumbing. A water closet is outside toilet. In such places as these, a woman is only a poor drudge muddling amongst the infinity of jobs. She may keep up her spirits, but she cannot keep up her standards of cleanliness and tidiness. There is always something to be done, and no conveniences, and almost literally no room to turn around. No sooner have you washed one child's face than another's is dirty. Before you have washed the crocks from one meal, the next is due to be cooked. I found great variation in the houses I visited. Some were as decent as one could possibly expect in the circumstances. Some were so appalling that I have no hope of describing them adequately. Give people a decent house and they'll soon learn to keep it decently. Moreover, with smart-looking house to live up to, they improve in self-respect and cleanliness, and their children start life with better chances. Nevertheless, in a corporation estate, that's a company town, there is an uncomfortable, almost prison-like atmosphere, and the people who live there are perfectly well aware of it. I'm going to skip a few. I'll go to page 80. Of course, the post-war development of cheap luxuries has been a very, very favorable thing to our rulers. It's quite likely that fish and chips, art silk stockings, tinned salmon, cut-price chocolates, the movies, the radio, strong tea, and the football pools have between them averted revolution. Page 88. Where are the monstrous men with chests like barrels and mustaches like the wings of eagles who strode across my childhood's gaze 20 or 30 years ago? Buried, I suppose, in the Flanders mud. If the English physique has declined, then no doubt this is partly due to the fact that the Great War carefully selected the million best men in England and slaughtered them, largely before they had time to breed. But the process must have begun earlier than that, and it must be due ultimately to unhealthy ways of living, to industrialism. I don't mean the habit of living in towns. Probably towns are healthier than the country in many ways, but the modern industrial techniques which provide you with cheap substitutes for everything. We may find in the long run that tinned food is a deadlier weapon than the machine gun. Going down. It's only when, page 94, it's only when you get a little further north to the pottery towns and beyond that you begin to encounter the real ugliness of industrialization, an ugliness so frightful and so arresting that you are obliged, as it were, to come to terms with it. A slag heap, which is the remains of burned coal scooped out of the oven and just dumped on the countryside, is at best a hideous thing because it's so planless and formless. It's something just dumped on the earth like the emptying of a giant's dustbin. On the outskirts of the mining towns, there are frightful landscapes where your horizon is ringed completely round by jagged gray mountains, and underfoot is mud and ashes, and overhead the steel cables where tubs bags of dirt travel slowly across miles of country. Often the slag heaps are on fire, the lunar landscape of slag heaps. It seems like a world from which vegetation has been banished. Nothing exists except smoke, shale, ice, mud, ashes, and foul water. When you contemplate such ugliness as this, there are two questions that strike you. First, is it inevitable? Second, does it matter? Coal doesn't fully burn. It always leaves a residue, even the best coal. That residue has to be cleaned out of your coal fire furnace every so often. You scrape it out, that's slag. You then send it across the countryside on a cable car and dump it. And when the heap gets mountain-sized almost to the cable car, you just start a new one. So there are areas in the heart of England and in northern England which today are sort of grown over, but they started out as just these mountains of slag heaps. In the wind, the coal dust blows. The coal dust poisons the water. We'll talk more tomorrow. Oh, to study for my midterm. Study the exams I've given you and the quiz you'll get tomorrow, Friday. That's where I produce it from the exams I've written. And that's what you should study, the exams and the quiz I'll give you Friday. Have a good day. Hold on.
Wait, when did we have a quiz?
You will have one on Friday.